Good day to all of you, wherever you are coming from, different parts of the world. And my name is Gamini Manveer, Program Officer attached to the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention. I'll go through very briefly on the introduction of today's webinar. And, we are focusing today's webinar on the intersectional work between 10th and 11th meetings. And as some of you may not very conversant about the process, I will just briefly go through a few slides about what's the Chemical Review Committee and what's their main role is. And this, as most of you and probably all of you know, is the subsidiary body established by the Conference of the Parties to review the notifications of final regulatory action taken by parties on a chemical and proposals by developing countries experiencing problems of severely hazardous pesticide formulations under the conditions of use in their territory. Based on the criteria given in Annex 2 and Annex 4 of the Convention, and recommend, if they meet, to the Conference of the Parties listing of the chemicals in Annex 3 to the Convention. The CRC, the Chemical Review Committee, consists of 31 independent experts nominated by the governments and selected by the Conference of the Parties representing all regions. As you may know, to trigger, especially for final regulatory actions, there's a slight difference for severely hazardous pesticide formulations. The Convention requires notifications of final regulatory actions on banning or severe restriction on a particular chemical, notified to the Secretariat from 2 different peak regions. These are sent through the designated national authorities of the respective countries to the Secretariat, and then the Secretariat informs all banned and restricted chemicals through the PIC circular, and at the same time it verifies the notifications against Annex 1 criteria for final regulatory actions and Annex 4 Part A for severely hazardous pesticide formulations. And if they meet, then the notifications will be submitted to the Chemicals Review Committee for their consideration. The Chemical Review Committee undertake a review of the notifications of the particular chemical and prepare, if it meets the respective criterion, prepares a draft decision guidance document and submitted to the Conference of the Parties for decision. Eventually, if the Conference of the Parties agrees, it goes into the Annex 3 of the Convention, or if it doesn't, the chemical stay off the Convention. Normally, the intersectional work of the Chemicals Review Committee has 3 main tasks or areas of work. As I mentioned before, review of final regulatory actions. Preliminary review of final regulatory actions are undertaken during the intersessional period. That will be forwarded or rather discussed further and agreed during the actual meeting of the Chemical Review Committee. So the work, preliminary work is conducted so that the committee can make an efficient use of the time during the meeting. And similarly, the intersessional period, they do draft decision guidance documents for the chemicals that are recommended by the committee to be considered by the conference of the parties for listing. And the third is during the intersessional period, they are drafting or updating technical documents related to the work of the chemicals review committee. For this 10th and 11th intersessional working period, following are the work that has been focused on mainly. Drafting of decision guidance documents for short-chained chlorinated paraffins and for tributyl tin compounds, both are for industrial chemicals category. And in addition, we have had preliminary reviews of final regulatory actions and civilly hazardous proposals of civilly hazardous pesticide formulations of atrazine, carbofuran, carbosulfan, and dimethoate emulsifiable concentrate of 400 grams per liter. So today in our webinar, we will be focusing on short-chain chlorinated paraffins and tributyl tin compounds, as my colleague Dan mentioned before. So this is just basic thought starter, or rather, focusing ourselves into today's presentations. And with that, I will hand back to my colleague Dan for the follow-up presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to wish all of you a good morning, dear colleagues. My name is Anja Bartels, and I'm a member of the CRC since I think it's already 7 years now. And I'm going to talk to you about the draft decision guidance document for tributyl tin compounds, TBT. So, do I have to? Okay. In the beginning, I would like to say some general words on the process of drafting a DGD and on the intersessional work Gamini told you already about. So we have the working procedures. It's called the process for drafting DGDs and accompanying explanatory notes. You find them on the PIC web page. There's a handbook, and in this handbook the working procedures is included. So the first step is what Gamini told you. The CRC during the meeting decided to recommend the listing of a chemical, and then a work plan is prepared. This work plan gives the dates and also defines two co-chairs. So my co-chair is Pavoletta, who is also one of the participants. And the first step is that the co-chairs draft an internal proposal for DGD. In a second step, they send it to the drafting group members for commenting. So besides the co-chairs, there's also a drafting group defined. The next step is that the co-chairs update the first proposal based on the comments received from the group. And after this, there is the big commenting round. So the co-chair sent, or the secretariat sent the DGD to all CRC members and observers who attended the meeting where it was discussed, and they are all invited to comment on it. And the next step is that the co-chair prepare a draft DGD by including those comments. And as an additional document, a tabular summary is prepared, which includes all the comments and how they are addressed. In the next step, the DGD is sent again for a third commenting round to the drafting group for comments. Then the co-chairs finalize the draft DGD, send it to the secretariat, and then the draft DGD and the tabular summary of comments are forwarded to the CRC. So this is now the step. We are between step 8 and 9 for TBT at the moment. And specifically on the TBT DGD. The basis for this update is a notification from Canada. I said an update, so there was already an DGD existing. I will come to this again. So we have only one new notification. This has been discussed last October at CRC 10, and it's related to the use of tributyltin compounds as industrial chemicals. It's based on a final regulatory action to severely restrict the manufacture, use and sale of TBTs with some exemptions where it may still be used. And the reason was to protect the environment based on concerns on aquatic organisms, the high persistence of the compounds in the environment and the bioaccumulative properties. And TBT is some kind of a special case because we have notifications as a pesticide and as industrial chemical. So TBT is already included in Annex 3 of the Rotterdam Convention. This is the famous list, based on notifications from the EU and Canada, but those relate to the use as a pesticide, more precisely as biocide, and DGD on TBT was already available since many years, I think. So the new notification from last year relates to the use in the category industrial chemical. And we had a lot of debates in the last meeting. It was quite interesting because it's not a common case. And usually, as you know, you need two notifications. And as Kamini explained to you, but we have already two in one category. Now we have one in a second category. And we were not sure if we would need a second notification also in the category industrial or not. But in the text of the Rotterdam Convention, we didn't find anything about this. So the CRC, at the end of the discussion, agreed that it would be sufficient to list the DGD after finalization, the substance after finalization of the DGD in the second category also. So the decision was to add the notification and the background to the existing DGD. So that's the first time that the DGD covers both of the categories. So just to give you to introduce you to the DGD, I want to give you an overview on the structure. So in the beginning you have introductory sections and a set of abbreviations. Then we have 4 sections: identification, reasons for inclusion, protective measures, hazards and risks. And then we have 4 annexes: further information, details of the regulatory action, addresses and references. So the first sections are introduction, purpose and disclaimer. This is moreover a standard text in all DGDs, and it's finalized at the very end of the process, actually after the conference of the parties, because of all of the dates of the decisions have to be included here. Then there is a standard core set of abbreviations. Section 1 is a very important one. It's called identification and uses. It's clear that you have very precisely identified the chemical you are talking about, and also with regard to the listing afterwards. So this section contains the CAS, UPAC names and numbers, structural formula, common names, the category, trade names, formulation types, manufacturers, and the users in the notifying parties. And in the case of TBT, this is defined as a group of substances. And as you see, we have 7 individual substances listed here and the chemical structure. And this is particularly important for substances that are defined as a group. And we had discussions during the intersessional work of the DGD drafting on this. So in the understanding of me and my co-chair Pavoletta, The definition should cover all substances that fall under the chemical formula. As you see it, this has a part X, which may differ chemically. So not only the 7 individual substances that are listed, but all substances that are covered by this formula. But we might need further discussion on this in the October meeting, because I'm not sure if all people are happy with how we see this. Section 2 is on reasons for inclusion in the PIC procedure. Under Section 1 is the final regulatory action. This gives a brief summary of the regulatory action and the reasons why it was taken, for instance, due to human health concerns or environmental concerns, and this for each of the notifying parties and each category. And it gives the legal background of the decision. The second undersection is the risk evaluation, which gives a summary highlighting the key of the risk evaluation, but I will go into that in some more details later. So here you see the final regulatory action for all the 3 notifications. This was from Canada in the category pesticide, from the EU in the category pesticide, and now the new one is from Canada as industrial chemical. And the reason was in all cases environment, and in one it was additionally human health. And the risk evaluation, here I only show you the latest notification, but I have another slide on the risk evaluation. So it's just that you get an impression how the DGD looks like. Section 3 is on protective measures that have been applied concerning the chemical. It's on regulatory measures to reduce the exposure. This is particularly important in case of human health concerns of chemicals. Other measures to reduce the exposure, this is primarily for severely restricted and not banned chemicals. For TBT, for instance, we mentioned some initiatives that are in place in Canada. And also there is for the pesticidal use, there's an international convention in place with regard to dangerous anti-fouling ship paints. A section that is also quite important is on alternatives. And there's one section on socio-economic effects. This is, however, optional because not in all cases you have information on this. Section 4 is on hazards and risks to human health and/or the environment. This includes hazard classification, exposure limits, packaging and labeling, first aid and waste management issues. And I included for you the hazard classification from the EU on TBT, which includes the most recent CLP classification and also the old classification. Annex 1 is called Further Information on the Substance. This is the most scientific part of the DGD. It includes the information submitted by the notifying parties based on their national risk assessments, evaluations, which were used to support the final regulatory action, but also results of international reviews such as WHO, ICPS, JMPR, or the POPROC reports. The subsections are physicochemical properties, toxicological properties, human exposure and risk evaluation, environmental fate and effects, and environmental exposure and risk evaluation. So on the environmental risk evaluation that was conducted, that was the basis of the latest notification from Canada on TBT. The Canadian government performed a detailed review on organotin compounds, among them TBT, and they state that it's well known that TBT is toxic to aquatic organisms already at low concentrations. It shows very high persistence, and it has bioaccumulative properties. So this is clearly a high hazard and leads to a high risk. And in the risk assessment done by Canada, they calculated a risk quotient on the basis of modeled as well as measured exposure and toxicity. So the exposure was based on one hand on concentrations of TBT in water and sediment that were modeled for Canada, and secondly on measured concentrations of TBT in water and sediment. And then the quotient was calculated, and this shows that you can conclude that the concentrations of TBT under Canadian circumstances are high enough to cause adverse effects in sensitive organisms. And furthermore, the substance meet the criteria for persistence and bioaccumulations as set out in Canada's national regulation. And high concentrations of TBT in sediments are also known to adversely affect aquatic organisms, for instance, mollusks. So this was the risk evaluation, and as you know, this is a very important factor in the procedure of the Rotterdam Convention because it relates to the critical criterion of Annex 2b of the Convention. Annexes 2, 3, and 4 are the details of the final regulatory actions as reported, addresses of DNAs of the notifying parties, and a list of references. So, as you see, for the Canadian notification in the category industrial, it includes the effective date and more the legal background of the final regulatory action, which is also quite important, and a short outline of the background, the risk evaluation, and the criteria. And I told you in the beginning that besides of the DGD, you have a tabular summary of comments received, which you will have as an INF document at the CRC 11 in October. Here you see a short description of the comments from which party, and the response of my co-chair and me, if it was accepted or not, if not, why not. And in the intersessional work on some critical comments, we had an email discussion between the co-chairs. This is quite common. So, and with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and afterwards you can ask your questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. My name is Lonneke van Leeuwen. I've been a CRC member since 2011. And on behalf of my co-chair, Ana Ramirez from Honduras, and I would like to show you the internal proposal for the draft decision guidance document for short-chain chlorinated paraffins, which I prefer calling SCCPs because short-chain chlorinated paraffins is quite a long term. This presentation contains an introduction on the process of writing the DGD, some information on the contents of the DGD, and I think most important, the discussion points we expect for the upcoming CRC meeting in October of this year. The story about the DGD of SCCP started a year and a half ago in the winter of 2013-2014, when an intersessional task group was established to review the notifications of final regulatory action on SCCPs from Norway and Canada. And what the task group did is to establish whether both notifications met the criteria set out in Annex 2 of the Rotterdam Convention. And I'm going to show you these criteria on the next slide. What you can see is that Annex 2 contains 4 main criteria. And this is criterion Annex 2A. The task group confirms that the final regulatory action has been taken in order to protect human health or the environment. Then I would like to focus your attention on criterion Annex 2B, which is that the task group establishes that the final regulatory action has been taken as a consequence of a risk evaluation. And this criterion is usually point of discussion during the CRC meeting because it's formed from 3 sub-criteria, in which the third one, criterion B3, you see it marked out in bold in the presentation, that the final regulatory action was based on a risk evaluation involving prevailing conditions within the party. This criterion is usually discussed because it's not always clear whether the information for meeting this criterion is provided by the notifiers. And in this case, for SCCPs, both notifying countries, Norway and Canada, provided a lot of information. So criterion B3 and criterion B as a whole was clearly met. Then the task group considered whether the final regulatory action provides a sufficient broad basis to merit listing of the chemical in Annex 3. And this criterion as well is made up out of a number of sub-criteria, which were all met for both notifications because they, quite some supportive data was delivered. And the fourth Annex 2 criterion, that intentional misuse in itself was not an adequate reason for listing, was met as well for both notifications. So summarizing, the task group concluded that the Annex 2 criteria were met for both notifications for SCCP, and the CRC during its meeting in October 2013 agreed on that conclusion and decided to recommend SCCP for listing under Annex 3 of the Rotterdam Convention. Because of that decision, an intersessional drafting group was established, and this drafting group prepared a draft TGD over several commenting rounds, as Anja showed you in her presentation. Now I would like to tell you something about the contents of the DGD for SCCP. For the structure of this presentation, I've used the same structure as used in the DGD. So the DGD contains 4 chapters. The first one about identification and uses. The second one about reasons for inclusions in the PIC procedure. The third one about protective measures that have been applied concerning the chemical. And the fourth one about hazards and risks to human health and the environment. And those chapters are followed by a number of annexes, which I will mention but won't discuss in detail. On the identification of SCCPs, this is a quite difficult subject because SCCP occur in complex mixtures, and they're not easily described by chemical name or fixed molecular formula. You see the molecular formula for SCCP is presented on the screen. Therefore, we propose to have the DGD refer to all SCCP as described by the molecular formula, and in addition add a non-exhaustive list of chemical names and cause numbers from the notification as well. The following uses of SCCP were given in the notification. In the Norwegian notification, SCCPs were reported to be used as softeners in plastics, in paints, fillers and coatings, and as flame inhibitors in rubber, plastics and textiles, and as well as additives in other chemical substances and products. Further, limited use in metalworking fluids as well as in certain lubricants and car care products was reported. In the Canadian notification, SCCPs were reported to be used as extreme pressure additives in metalworking fluids. However, it was also said that this use was phased out in 2010. And further, it was mentioned that SCCPs may have been imported in products including paints, adhesives, sealants, rubbers and plastics. Now I'd like to continue to Chapter 2 of the DGD. This chapter gives reasons for inclusion in the PIC procedure of this chemical. And I'd like to start with the Norwegian notification first. This notification says that the final regulatory action on SCCPs is a ban, and it states that the import, production, export, sale and use of SCCP in pure form, in preparations or in products containing over 0.1% is prohibited. However, use for research and analytical purposes is still allowed, and the reason for this final regulatory action is to protect human health. In the Canadian notification, it is stated that the final regulatory action on SCCPs is a ban, and the final regulatory action says that all manufacture, use, sale, offering for sale or import of SCCPs or products containing them is prohibited, unless they are incidentally present in a product or if used in a laboratory for analysis in scientific research or as a laboratory analytical standard. And the reason for this final regulatory action is to protect human health and the environment. Both notifications indicate that the final regulatory action is based on a risk evaluation. Both notifications and supporting documentation provided a lot of information on these risk evaluations, but in short, the Norwegian notification shows that from the risk evaluation there is concern about environmental risk, since SCCP are very toxic to aquatic organisms, they degrade slowly, they have high potential for bioaccumulation, and they've got potential for long-range transport. In the Canadian notification, it is reported that the risk evaluation raises concern about the risk for human health and the environment, while SCCP may enter the environment in concentrations or under conditions that may constitute a danger in Canada to human life or health. And the details on this risk evaluation are given in Annex 1 of the DGD. Now I'd like to move on to Chapter 3. Because of the type of information in this chapter, I've chosen not to discuss the details of the contents of the chapter, but just mention the kind of information that's in it. In Chapter 3, you'll find information about protective measures that have been applied concerning this chemical, including regulatory measures to reduce exposure, other measures to reduce exposure, and this information is taken from the POPROC draft risk profile, which will be important for discussion further on in the presentation. Chapter 3 also gives information about alternatives and socio-economic effects, and this information comes forward from the Canadian supporting documentation. In Chapter 4, the final chapter of the DGD, the hazards and risks of to human health and the environment are presented. On the right side of your screen, you can see what it looks like. It gives information about hazard classification, exposure limits, packaging and labeling requirements, first aid, and waste management. And after that, you've got 4 annexes. The first one on further information on the substance. The second one on details on the final regulatory actions. The third one on contact details of the designated national authorities, and the fourth one's on references. So now I've shown you the contents of the DGD. And I'd like to share with you what I think that the main discussion points will be during the next CRC meeting. I think the first one is the identity of the SCCPs. It's not simple, so it will probably give discussion. You've seen our proposal. And the second point we would like to discuss is how we should handle information from the POPROC draft risk profile. For SCCP, we are in a very interesting situation that the substance is considered under the POPs Review Committee and the Chemical Review Committee at the same time, which gives a lot of extra information because we already have the POPROC draft risk profile, which gives a lot of valuable information about SCCPs. However, at the same time, the profile at this moment has got draft status, and it will be discussed during the POPROC meeting, which is held a week before the CRC meeting. So at this point in time, we've included parts of the POPROC draft profile text in the DGD, and we've marked them, and we propose to adapt or delete them depending the POPROC discussion on their draft risk profile. And the final point of attention for discussion during the CRC meeting is how we can keep up to date in between POPROC and CRC intersessional working groups while we work on the same substance at the same time. So I'd like to thank you for your attention.